I've been interested in invasive species. Oh, they used to be called alien invasive species, but alien's become a bit politically incorrect, so they've changed it to invasive non-native species. That's what they're called these days. And I lived in Peckham in London, and there was a railway line just at the top of the road, and the embankment was just a complete monoculture of giant Japanese hogweed, Japanese knotweed, not started very well. Anyway, Japanese knotweed, and it completely grown as far as you could see. It was just nothing else. And I thought, well, that's interesting, and that started me on what is probably best part of 40 years of sort of research of various sorts. Okay, so you may wonder why we've got a mallard duck on the front page. Well, it'll all become clear fairly soon. Just to define what a non-native species is, there are loads of garden escapes and things like this which aren't really established in the long term, so we don't count those as non-native species. They're usually counted as casuals, and it has to be introduced by man, unlike, for instance, a collared dove, which is self-introduced in the 70s, and then it has to be to a location outside its native range, and it also has to be a self-sustaining population. There are about 3,000 plus non-native species in Britain, and a lot of those are plants, and about 40% of our flora and fauna, what we take as being native, about 40% have been introduced by man at one time or other. We'll give you a few examples in a minute. And they're divided into, by botanists, it doesn't really apply to animals, but for plants, they divided into archaeophytes, neophytes, and casuals. Archaeophytes are plants that were introduced by man more than 500 years ago. Neophytes is less than 500 years ago, and casuals are ones that are just about, you know, like you might find a hollyhock growing somewhere in what was an old allotment, or a cabbage or something like that. Those aren't really established as a self-sustainable population, so we don't count them as either archaeophytes or neophytes. But only about 10% of the non-native species anywhere in the world, really, that kind of order of magnitude, actually go on to become a problem, become an invasive problem that's threatening our native ecosystems. So, the current term then is INNS. It used to be IAS, which was a lot easier. And the important thing is the invasive bit, and that invasive means spreading and multiplying rapidly. I mean, fairly obvious, really. The cost of non-native species globally is about 5% of gross GDP. Gross. Thank you, just checking. 1.5 trillion per year, and for Britain, it's quite a lot lower, but over the 25 years between 1976 and 2021, it's been put at about 13.7 billion. And we'll look at it's basically costs of trying to control or to remediate their effect. And the other thing is losses, which can be particularly agricultural losses. So here's some long-established non-native species. Common carp, which is probably been around about 1,000 years. Fallow deer, which were introduced by the Romans. They're native of the Middle East. Snowdrops are probably introduced by Neolithic because they found snowdrops in lots of Neolithic sites. So their snowdrops distribution is very much linked to human habitation. And that's the reason that they believe that they were introduced, maybe as, maybe Druids thought they were, because they're flowering in the winter, you can see they would have some status. Alexander's, which is this one here, was introduced to the Romans before celery was discovered. It was you eat the stems, you use it in cooking. Hares, of course, and rabbits. Hares are native of the rest of Europe, but they weren't in Britain. And rabbits are native of the Iberian Peninsula, and they were introduced by the Romans. The Romans used to carry them around as fresh meat when they're on campaigns. Few plants. Sycamore there, introduced, must just about be an archaeophyte because it was introduced in the early 1500s. There was one planted by, it was a sort of royal event in Ham Common near Putney. And then basically plant collectors have introduced these others. So Rhododendron ponticum, which is the invasive one. There are lots of other rhododendrons, but none of the others have been particularly invasive. That's Japanese knotweed, and that's giant hogweed. Japanese knotweed, as the name implies, Japan. Giant hogweed's very common in sort of Turkey, what's called Asia Minor, and the very east of Europe. I've been to Georgia, and in Georgia, all the river valleys are just chock-a-block with it, and doesn't cause any problem because everyone's used to it, I suppose. Interesting thing is that a lot of non-native species are established in cities and sort of human populated areas. And the reason is because quite a lot of them occupy niches which don't occur naturally. So cities have, they're warm places for a start. They don't get, a lot of areas don't get frosted. And they also have kind of cracks in pavements, have compacted soil like this. That's pineapple mayweed from southern Europe. And it's thought to have, it's a member of the daisy family, thought to have been carried on the tyres of the early motorised vehicles along muddy tracks, you know. And then this is Oxford ragwort, which, as the name implies, comes from Mount Vesuvius. Now, it was introduced to Oxford Botanical Gardens, and it grows on volcanic slopes in the Mediterranean, and it's adapted to growing in those kind of rocky cracks in rocks where there's very little soil and not a lot of rain, just like the cracks in pavements and tarmac. And that one there is one of the most widespread plants in the world. It's called Canadian fleabane, and it's everywhere I've been. I haven't been to Antarctica, it won't be there, but it's on every other continent. And I have an eye for it, And everywhere I go, just about, you can see it growing. What's the problem then? Problem is that it's a threat to biodiversity, especially on islands. I'll come back to that. Man's spreading non-native species unbelievably fast by our kind of global activities. And one of the things is that because biodiversity is being lost, in other words, rare species, endemic species, species that are in very localized regions, which are often on islands, are going extinct. And invasive species are spreading globally. So the consequence of that is homogenization. So in other words, it's pretty much the case now that if you travel anywhere in the subtropics, you've got the same set of plants at every place, and birds like rose-necked parakeets, common myna birds, red-vented bulbuls. There are quite a few species that are just everywhere, and are limited only by their ability to survive different climates. The Convention on Biological Diversity, which was pretty important, it actually came up with the idea, the concept of biodiversity was spawned there, and they produced an Article 8 which talked about the prevention, control and eradication of non-native species, and they identified non-native species being the second most important threat to biodiversity after habitat destruction. That's pretty bad. Here's some birds. Right, Canada goose, you all know. Do you know the mandarin duck? It was very rare in Japan when it was introduced, but it's also in China, native to China, and they've had a big conservation project going there, and they have plenty of them now, but it was a threatened species, and so it was introduced here really to keep the species going. And it's gradually becoming invasive, but it's not really, it's on the verge. It's been around for a long time, but numbers are beginning to build up. It's turning up a lot more places than it used to. Egyptian goose was introduced in the 30s, but it remained really quiet up in north part of East Anglia for decades, whereas it was spreading like mad in the Netherlands. And then all of a sudden it started taking off, excuse the pun, and they spread, and they're now very widespread. Not quite as widespread as the Canada goose, but give them time. I think in a fight, I'd go for the Egyptian goose, because their native range are water holes where you get lions. I mean, they bring up little chicks where you've got massive African wildlife. So they're pretty tough birds. Ring-necked parakeet, and which we'll talk more about, and then little owl, which is an introduced species. It never really, it's in France, but when the glaciers withdrew, quite a lot of things didn't get across the channel before it flooded. Before that, it was a land bridge, so some things got across. But for instance, bluebell woods, the reason you get bluebell woods in Britain and not anywhere, well, very few anywhere else, is because when the land bridge flooded, the bluebells had got across, but all the other things that compete with bluebells on the continent, most of them didn't get across. And so bluebells have no competition here, so they dominate. Where if you go to a wood with bluebells in France, there'll be loads of other competing plants. so it's not quite so dominant. Adverse effects of invasive species, competition, I mean a lot of parasites are invasive species. I mean COVID's an invasive species. We've got mosquitoes that carry yellow fever are on their way here. There's two species. There's Aedes aegypti, which is the tropical species that's famous for carrying yellow fever. And there's another one called Aedes pictatus, which is used to colder temperatures, and it's in France now, and it can carry a whole string of different things: dengue fever, yellow fever, a thing called chikungunya, and quite a number of other diseases. And they can carry these. So one of the big problems earlier in the 1900s was rinderpest, which is a disease of bovines in Africa, and it spread through cattle and got into and spread around, killed a lot of cattle at one time. Predation, so something like a mink is a good example, or if you want to go to Australia, foxes, stoats, and weasels and various other things. And if you want to go to New Zealand, there are a dozen different invasive mammals that are predators there. Even things like house mice are a major predator in New Zealand because nothing's adapted to a mammal predator. They modify habitats, so rhododendrons, they can change. The thing with rhododendrons is they're what's called allelopathic, so they produce toxic root exudates that prevent other plants from growing close to them. And there are a lot of the serious invasive species around the world have that trait of being allelopathic. But anything like Japanese knotweed grows in such dense swards that things can't compete with it. In fact, I had a student did a study of what did grow in Japanese knotweed, and it was all woodland understory species, because Japanese knotweed casts so much shade, the only thing that can grow inside it are things that are adapted to growing in shade, which is naturally woodland. Hybridization, we'll mention that in a minute. Toxicity and poisoning, so I'm going to mention a sort of worm which is very toxic, but you know about the cane toad in Australia, which is highly toxic and kills practically anything that tries to predate it, dies. And then damage of stored goods and things like that. And a lot of the cost is related to trying to control or eradicate these species. Okay, looking at threat by hybridizations. Spanish bluebell, native bluebell, you all know about that, do you? Then we've got red deer there and sika deer. There are no red deer, it's thought there are no red deer in this country that don't have some sika genes. In fact, in Ireland, they moved a population of red deer onto the Aran Islands just so they could maintain some sika-free red deer. They're quite different. Sika deer are much smaller, but anyway, they can hybridize. I mean, I'll mention in a minute. This is why the mallard duck's there, because all over the world, there are mallard ducks mating with relatives. The anas, which is the the genus that our mallard duck belongs to, there are a lot of closely related ducks around, especially in the southern hemisphere, and mallards will mate with any of them. They're just rampant. And then here we've got the ruddy duck and the white-headed duck, which is Europe's rarest duck. It's also in North Africa. And Peter Scott, bless him, introduced the ruddy duck from North America and to Slimbridge, and it was free-flying, so surprise, surprise, they escaped. Got over to France and then spread through there, and the French eradicated them. So there was a lot of pressure from Europe to eradicate them in Britain. So the RSPB, not having eradicated anything before, sort of thought, we'll just do it, you know, nice and friendly, open, show what we're doing. And so they killed quite a few. And then there was a mass rebellion. People stopped subscribing and things like that. So they said, okay, and then did it secretly. So they did it more or less eradicate them, yeah. Yes, so hybridization is quite an issue. So there's loads of household pests, clothes moths, for instance, and green beetles, and cockroaches. I'd like to say something in support of cockroaches, because there are only sort of 4 species around the world. There's German, Oriental, Australian, and American cockroaches, and there are thousands of others, and they're all out there living in the woods, keeping themselves to themselves. In fact, we have 2 or 3 species here in the New Forest mostly, and they don't have anything to do with Chinese restaurants or things like that. So. A lot of our sort of well-known garden pests, like lily beetle, for instance, and has anyone seen a rosemary beetle? I've never seen one. They're really attractive beetle, I think you have to agree, but it's a chrysomelid. These are both belong to a group called the chrysomelid beetles. A lot of them are very shiny green. And anyway, yes, that's an American species. It's an Asian longhorn beetle, which is a forestry pest because they kill branches on trees. That one there, I better not point, the one in the middle, it's the horse chestnut leaf miner. It's a little tiny moth that was discovered in Britain in about 2005, I think, something like that. And it comes from it's basically the native of the range of the horse chestnut, which is Bulgaria and Albania, that sort of area. And the horse chestnut was introduced without its main pest species. And the pest species has gradually found its way all the way to Britain, because horse chestnuts have been planted all over Europe, and so they've managed to spread, finding their own food. But if horse chestnuts were an invasive species, we probably have introduced that insect to control it, because it causes horse chestnuts to look like it's autumn in about June or July. But it's not life-threatening, it doesn't kill them. And then that's another forestry pest, the bark beetle. The oak processionary moth is a native of southern Europe. It's got very irritant hairs. They're called processionary moths because the caterpillars all go along behind one another. It could be several hundred, all nose to tail, going like that. And I remember once I was with some students in Corsica, and there were a lot of them around, and a car drove past. They were crossing the road. Car drove past, and there were the hares drifting around, and my students were getting painful eyes and inhaling. We had to get out of there quickly. Quite noxious. Ways that they were introduced. Garden escapes, I mean, all things like rhododendrons, Japanese knotweed, they were all introduced by keen gardeners, wealthy landowners who used to send people off to China and that to collect plants for them. Fish farming, the crayfish and things like that are all escapes from fish farms, and pets, crops. Shipborne is a real problem because ships carry alien species in several different ways. They can get them as fouling on the bottom of the ship. So, for instance, we have New Zealand barnacles are common now in Britain, and in New Zealand, British barnacles are common, and they're being carried on the hulls of ship plying trade. Also, tankers, when tankers offload their load, they become unstable. So they pump water in to the tanks to stabilize them. Then when they get to the other end to put on a new load, they pump that water out. So there has been traffic from the Caspian Sea to the Great Lakes in America, and there are some dreadful little mussels, which I'll mention again in a minute, have spread by that means. Stowaways in cargo and that sort of thing. Oh, acclimatization societies. It's a British invention. When people went to Australia and the Seychelles and that, you know, and they thought, so boring, all these millions of different species of parrot, so boring. What we need is some rabbits and foxes, stoats, starlings. And so they introduced British wildlife and just let it go. And then in addition to that, the Shakespeare Appreciation Society in New York decided to release all the birds mentioned in Shakespeare's sonnets into Central Park. And the starling took rather well. And now they spend $500 million a year trying to control starlings in America. And the French started doing it as well. They always copy us, don't they? Anyway, imported timber, a lot of things come in like that. Hunting and angling. Anglers, are there any anglers here? Oh, I think they're irresponsible. They just let fish, any old fish anywhere. Carp are not, they're not even a native species, but you get them everywhere. And that's because they get big and anglers like them. Well, they're nice fish. But no, it's crazy things like zander and Wells catfish, which I shall mention. And we've got pheasants and lots of things like that. Tourism, carrying seeds on your socks and that. And in America, in the Kakadu National Park in Australia, they mapped out where all the invasive species were, and it was where all the tourists walk. And so now you have to sterilize your boots before you allowed through the gate. And then another good source of alien species is biological control, where you're trying to control invasive species, like the cane toad, which is probably one of the worst invasive species anywhere. was introduced to control caterpillars, I believe. There are many other examples, such as mongoose, barn owls. Invasive flatworms, these have come in sort of plants imported with soil on them. So that's the New Zealand flatworm, that's the Australian flatworm, and this is the Brazilian flatworm, it's more recent, which the generic name is Obama. I know, it's a bit rude, isn't it? I thought he was good. And this one was first discovered in Kew Gardens in the 1800s. It's called a hammerhead worm. It can get up to a foot long. It eats earthworms, and it's native to Southeast Asia, but it was obviously brought over and science first discovered it there. But there's dozens of different species of hammerhead worms. The most amazing thing about this and some of the others is that they produce a thing called tetrodotoxin. Has anyone heard of tetrodotoxin? You know the puffer fish that Japanese people like to eat? And when it's filleted, if a tiny fragment of the liver gets into it, it kills him in agony. It's a neurotoxin, and it's produced also by this worm. So don't eat any, okay? There's one eating an earthworm. And ecologically, the removal of earthworms from the ecosystem is disastrous, not only for the soil, but for so many species that depend on worms. I mean, even buzzards depend on earthworms. When they're young, it's a major part of their diet. Here's some fish that were introduced. That one's that's a Wells catfish. There are stories in the Danube where it's native, the Danube catchment, and the Volga, I think, of children being swallowed by them. But they get pretty big, sort of 500 kilos, that sort of weight. And they're in a lot of lakes, especially in the Midlands, but they're not that big yet because they live for a long time. But they eat moorhens. They're just, you just see a moorhen. And that one is called a zander, which is also from a lot of Eastern European, Central European rivers. And it's in the Kennet and Avon navigation. And I was walking along there one time, and someone caught a zander, and I said, "Oh, well, it's the first one I've seen in Britain." He said, "Yeah, I throw them over the hedge." I said, if you go to a restaurant in Eastern Europe, you pay a fortune for zander. It's fantastic fish. It's rather similar to white sort of sea fish. It's a superb eating fish. So I said to him, "Eat them, you know." And then that there is called a topmouth gudgeon, which have been introduced to quite a few lakes. It's native of Asia, but it carries a parasite which kills other fish, and it doesn't harm that. This is a story that you get quite a lot, where alien species bring along with them a disease that kills a native one. But anyway, yes, so the topmouth gudgeon, the Environment Agency have eradicated them from a number of lakes where they actually spray the lake with rotenone or Deris. Have you heard of that, sir? Insecticide. It used to be used, it's a short-lived insecticide. It's one of the better ones, but it's so toxic to plants. In fact, it originally was used in Asia by the Indians for getting fish. They go and chuck it in a pond, kill all the fish, and take them home. The leading bodies in Britain, FERA is a department of the Environment Agency, of DEFRA rather, and they do risk assessments on species that might get here so that they can now be prepared. So they're much more prepared than they used to be. So then the GB Non-Native Species Secretariat, they have an app actually, which I have on my phone, and if you see a non-native species, then you can report it. Forest research used to be part of the Forestry Commission, are very aware of it, so because there are a number of forest pests. But then the most important of all is called CABI, and CABI is called the Centre for Agriculture and Biosciences International. It's originally based in Ascot, but it now has offices all over the world, and they are the leading authority in biological control methods. So biological control these days is a different story to what it used to be. It's highly specific and very safe. I'll come on to that. And then we got the RSPB in that are very much more conscious of alien species. In Europe, there are 14,000 alien species, 130 species of fish, 8 of crustacea, and 66 that they're really bothered about. Costs about up to 20 billion a year. And they have an EU regulation that was one of the various regulations that were written by the British. Most of the environmental regulations that we were complying with, that Nigel Farage was saying we were forced to accept, were written by the British. Just finally, Hawaii, 3,500 introduced species, 500 alien species in just in the Galapagos Islands. New Zealand has been called an ecological disaster because of the amount of non-native species and the amount of extinction that's gone on. Australia and the USA are pretty well known. And I'll speed up a bit, I think. So I mentioned that. Some are global in extent. The one important thing is that alien species only really become invasive in degraded ecosystems. So, for instance, if you go to South America, if you're walking along a forest, walking in a forest in South America, while you're going along a track, either side of the track, it's just full of non-native species. There's a grass called Yorkshire fog. Anyone know it? Common grass with a pink, it's a beautiful grass, velvety to the feel. You know it, it's probably growing on your lawn. In South America, it's everywhere, and it's along paths, but you walk 20 foot into that forest, there are none. And that's because an intact forest has got so little room for anything to establish, because you've got every niche, as we call it, every little opportunity to survive is being occupied. But when humans have come and chopped down trees or things like that, it makes space. And that's when you start to get invasive species moving in. So it's most severe in islands, because often islands are kind of naturally like that, where they have very few species, so they have a lot of opportunities for non-native species. Right, so this is some all in the tropics, that's Ivory Coast, and anywhere in West Africa, when they cut down forest, it just becomes green like that almost overnight. And it's a plant called Chromalina odorata, which is South American. It's a member of the daisy family. It's a thorny shrub, and it's allelopathic, so it poisons the ground, and it just spreads. And so they chop down the forest to grow crops, and then this moves in, they can't grow crops. Chop down some more forest. This is the same. This is Flores in Indonesia. All this here is another South American species called Ageratina. More or less the same story. Nothing can come back there. This is the Seychelles. This is Mahe. All that green stuff up there is lemongrass. Lemongrass, you know, lemongrass, Thai curries. It's an invasive species. This is all cinnamon growing here, this tree. The tea, which is what they want to grow, doesn't look really healthy to me. But you. That's Ageratina. And then this is another horrendous invasive, which is a South American, which you might recognize. If you go to a hotel around the Mediterranean, there's lots of it there, and that's called Lantana camara. It comes in various colors. This is the wild type, and it's very invasive in the tropics, especially in dry soils. If you go to India, it kills 100,000 cattle a year because it's very poisonous. It produces berries that the local birds eat and distribute. So it costs so much money. A lot of these problems are such a massive economic hit to poor countries. This is Myla minute weed. This is in Chitwan National Park in Nepal, and but it's all over tropical Asia, and it's an American, Central American plant. But in India, they've introduced, with Cabby's help, they've introduced some insects which feed on it, and they're knocking it back. In the Kaziranga National Park in Assam, they're knocking it back quite well. Those are island invasives. I'm sure you know most of them. Black rats aren't black. Black rats are brown. I think they just painted one just to make it look like distinguished. They're cuter than. They're smaller and they have a cuter face than a Norwegian or brown rat. That's house mouse, goats, all those. The only one you might not know is a brown tree snake, which is a native of Asia. And during the Japanese War, the Americans they had on Guam, which is an island in the middle of the Pacific, they had a runway. They were bringing in lots of supplies, and they were bringing crates, and these tree snakes got into the crates and escaped, and they caused a mass extinction in Guam. They've wiped out something like 25 endemic birds. It's all because of the tree snake that eats eggs, and it's just uncontrollable. No one can do anything about it. So what they've done, a few of the surviving birds, they've moved them to another island which didn't have any birds, but doesn't have any snakes. So why are some a problem and not others? Well, they increase and spread rapidly, some of them globally, but the thing is that they're often generalists, so like rats or cockroaches or humans, they eat a lot of different things. And that means that they're very flexible. And then also that a lot of them have a very high reproduction rate. So I mentioned about degraded ecosystems and islands. The term which is used by ecologists is ecological release. So when you introduce, say, sycamore tree to Britain in 1500, it was just a nice tree, didn't have all the things that eat it on it, and a baby tree, plant it, and then it grows up, it's got no pests, and so, I mean, sycamores are quite invasive, but in the 500 odd years it's been here, most of it's either things have adapted or they've found their way from, sycamores are native to eastern Hungary and then further east, eastern Hungary and then further east than that, so Turkey and then to the Middle East. What am I doing here? Oh, I better hurry up. And then climate change, we'll forget that. Well, it's a bit of science. Control. A lot of species aren't controllable, and prevention's better than cure. So there's quite a lot of surveillance, quite a lot. I mean, some countries have got really well-organised ways of watching the ports and things like that, like Seychelles and Australia, New Zealand. And then there's CABI, which is producing very good methods. And then recently there's things like gene editing and AI offer new potential for this. So look, just quickly going through some examples. This is a really good example. This is water hyacinth, which is a beautiful plant native to the Amazon basin. But because it's beautiful, it's been introduced all over the world to the tropics, to people's water gardens. And so it spread, and in Africa, on Lake Victoria, got to the point where it's sort of 3-kilometre belt of it round the edge, and all the fishermen couldn't get out to fish. So CABI found a couple of beetles which feed on it, and basically it's kind of sorted now. This is a weevil damage, and that's the weevil. That's the main one that damages it, and it just takes the aggressiveness out of it. In UK, the koipu, which was introduced in the 30s or 20s for fur as farming, has escaped. It was an attempt in the 70s to control it, but they failed, and then again in the 90s, and they succeeded. This is a North American mink, and a big problem, I mean, water voles, but not only water voles, little grebes and so many other things. They're incredibly amphibious, they can climb trees, they're fantastic. They're a super predator, really. And they can swim, so they've swum to the offshore islands in Scotland. So there are seabird colonies. I used to do some surveys on one just off of the Isle of Arran, and they got onto there and they were massacring the seabirds. A guy at Anglia University of East Anglia has developed a pheromone trap, which is incredibly successful, and they're actually doing an eradication program in Norfolk at the moment. But the plan, I mean, it seems amazing that but anyway, they seem confident. They plan on eradicating the North American mink in Britain. Let's see. This is New Zealand pygmy weed, as it's sometimes known. It's called Crassula helmsii. All that light green, all around there, is that, and this is Moor Green Lakes near Camberley, and it's practically uncontrollable until very recently. It's so resistant to insecticides, to weed killers, it kills everything else first. So that's Cressida helmsii with a tiny flower. It'll grow down to 1 metre underwater and then out of the water as well. There's a gall-forming mite, little tiny mite, which only feeds on this plant, and it sort of damages it and stops it spreading very well. This is another one. If you've ever been to Rutland, go to Rutland Canal, and it looks like that. It's called a Zola folliculoides, and it's a beautiful little water fern, very attractive actually. That's why it was used on aquaria and things. But it spreads like crazy, and if you've been to Steert Point, the RSPB reserve there, completely everywhere, and it gets onto the ducks. And then it gets carried, so I thought, how long is it going to be before it gets to the levels? It's in the levels. That's it. And there's a weevil has been recently found, and they're basically doing trial runs on it at the moment. That's the weevil. Only feeds on all these biological controls have been tested for 10 years or more. They do it in various countries and things like this. So it's not like it used to be with the cane toad. This is Japanese knotweed, growing through tarmac. And that's the damage of a little leafhopper, which has been released in 2010. So it's sort of slowly spreading. These biological controls don't do away with things overnight, but what they mean is the invasive species doesn't have an easy time of it anymore. It just knocks it back so it becomes less aggressive. These people are clearing a thing it's called floating pennywort, Hydrocotyle ranunculoides. This is in Weybridge on the Basingstoke Canal where it meets the Thames, and it just forms complete sheets, and that's been uncontrollable. They've been doing it manually, but there's a weevil for that as well. And then at last we got to the dreaded Himalayan balsam. Well, there's 4 species of balsam in this country. This one, which is called Touch Me Not, is native. And then there's an American one, orange balsam, and an Asian one called small balsam. And then there's Himalayan balsam. And you sometimes see one with a white lip, which is called Kashmiri balsam, and it's a different species. But Cabby have spent a long time looking for rust fungi that affect this and none of the other species. And in fact, what they found was the fungi they got were so specific, they wouldn't even affect all the Himalayan balsam. So that absolutely no problem in them spreading to these, because they wouldn't. So what they've had to do is to hunt around and find a variety of different strains that are in different valleys where the Himalayan balsam, and sort of combine them to find an effective control. So this forms a rust, Puccinia comarovii, and Verd lenguliferi, rust fungus. Now, just to finish off, just so that you don't think that it's only us that are getting hard done by, that's a swan. That's an invasive species in North America. People are asked not to they're shooting them, they're trying not to feed them. This is Patagonia. That's dandelions. That's what they grow like in Patagonia because they're an invasive species. This is South America as well, southern Chile, and that's gorse. We think we got a problem with gorse. And this is, I thought this was interesting because that purple loosestrife, lovely plant, invasive species in North America. This one is monkey flower, or mimulus, if you know it. And that, so that's purple loosestrife in North America, and that's monkey flower in North Yorkshire, growing in the ditches. And English ivy, I mean ivy from England, but it's heterohelix, which is all over Europe. It's been banned from sale as an aggressive invasive in Washington State last month. Other threats, rose ring parakeet. It used to be called ringneck. Everyone's decided it's now rose ring. You can see the pinky thing. And that's a monk parakeet, which is from Brazil, which is also invasive all over Europe. And it was here in Muswell Hill. And after the problem with ruddy ducks, the FERA, the organisation that's part of DEFRA, knew not to publicise it, so they quietly trapped them all and did away with them without anyone knowing. So we don't have them at the moment. This is the red-billed leothrix, beautiful little bird, about the size of a robin, really loud songbird from southern China and the Himalayas. It's a common aviary bird, and it's now living in the wild in Britain and multiplying in North Somerset and in North Wiltshire. So we'll be having them before long. The concern about them is that other places where they've established, they basically just dominate the morning the dawn chorus, and they compete for food and things. So they're good on feeders. They'll come along, force other stuff off. So watch this space. That's the zebra mussel, which I said got carried on tankers from the Caspian Sea to the Great Lakes. And that's what it does to native crayfish. It also blocks up the pipes on power stations, things like that. That's where it is in the Great Lakes. This is an American crayfish, which it's the only one you'll see now in this country. It's the only exotic crayfish we have, but there are 4 in Europe. So they have this one plus a couple of others, 3 others. They can walk overland. When it's raining, they'll walk to another river, another catchment. That's why they're everywhere. There's one decided to go for a walk. That's a vertical wall. I took that. That's the Basingstoke Canal. This is also from the Caspian Sea. Dichorogammarus is a we have a freshwater shrimp called gammarus, and this Dichorogammarus kills this one and everything else. It's about twice the size, and it's only in a few rivers at the moment. It's bad in the Netherlands. In fact, in the Netherlands, they've got 2 species, and they eat fish eggs. They do enormous damage. Pretty uncontrollable. That's a box. Anyone got a box tree? Anyone been attacked by a box moth? Yes. Well, they're pretty devastating. I've just started getting them in my moth trap about a month ago. I've not had them before. This is the oriental hornet. This shows it's a velutina, so it's that one, the mustard-coloured one. Crab roe, the blue one, is our native hornet, and that's the mustard-coloured one is, no, sorry, it's the yellow-coloured one, is the native range of the one that we're. If you go to France, I was just amazed. I was there a couple of years ago when the blossom was out, and every tree was covered in these hornets. So, it's actually smaller than our hornet and nothing like as attractive. Our hornet gets a bad press. It's a calm animal, not ready to sting, unlike a wasp. And I get them in my moth trap. I had 5 in my moth trap. And they're absolutely no problem to remove. They're not bolshy. But one of the problems with velutina is that it's a predator of honeybees. So it's here. It's in Jersey. It's uncontrolled in Jersey. It's been at Minehead, and it's established in Kent. There's no way we can control it when it's in France. This is a moth called Tuta absoluta. I think it's a great name, actually. It's from Africa, and it burrows into. It's a leaf miner of tomatoes, and it's devastating. If it gets into as it has in Spain, it completely devastates the whole greenhouse full of tomatoes. There'll be a wasp, a little calcid wasp that controls that. I bet you in no time at all, that'll be one that's controlled. That's the moth. I've not seen it myself yet. This is a bacteria which is killing off olive trees and a lot of else in Europe. It's spreading this way, Xylella fastidiosa, and that's the other things that it attacks. There's a new virus called a Sutu virus, which is killing blackbirds. Especially in London, there's been appreciable, measurable drop in some areas of London. You'd think it was Japanese, wouldn't you? South African. It was first recorded in South Africa, but it's particularly, blackbirds particularly sensitive to it, and they get this kind of ruffled up appearance. I have seen that in Wadford near here, but it might be sometimes where molting blackbirds will look a bit like that as well. So hopefully. And then more or less to finish, just wanted to mention one of the worst invasive species we have, which is pheasant. 45 to 50 million are released every year in Britain. That's more than the weight of all birds in Britain put together. And the significance of that is the weight tells you how much it eats. So you can think, I mean, okay, it's complicated because they're fed to an extent, but there are only 15 million are shot every year, 30 odd million, some of them go to feed foxes, and then some breed. The ones that breed are eating a most enormous amount of food that other birds would eat, but also things like grass snakes, frogs, lizards, you name it. I mean, they're just chickens, really. And then there's 6 to 12 million red-legged partridge and chuckers, which is a species very similar, and only 2.5 million of those are shot. Our native grey partridge has declined 88% in the last 45 years, and it's going under, and it's just ridiculous. What's it all for? For a few people who enjoy killing birds. Things that are heading our way. Raccoons, there are raccoons in Britain. People have got them as pests, and then they get a bit nippy or something, they just let them go. That's native in North America. Raccoon dogs are also here, which is an Asian species, common in Japan. Chipmunks are here, they're breeding. If you go near to Portsmouth, a place called Butser Hill, which is a really nice national nature reserve, there are chipmunks all over the place. Muskrats aren't here yet, but they're in Europe. They're North American. Beech martins or rock martins are all over Europe, right up to the Channel, and they're beautiful animals, look rather like pine martins, but sort of duller brown. But they're very urban. In the continent, they are completely urbanized, so they raid dustbins, go into people's lofts, and they like getting into cars and chewing all the wiring and into the loft. So they're really bad at chewing. I just put the house crane. They have arrived in Britain, but not bred, but they're breeding in the Netherlands. But that's a bird I've done 40 years research on. And it comes from India. It rides on boats. The hammerhead worms we mentioned. And then finally, I just mentioned the spotted lanternfly, which is a beautiful bug, about this big, and most amazing colours. This sort of spotted front wings, when it opens, it's bright red, and they are sort of sapsuckers, and they're really trashing all sorts of crops and garden plants in North America. It's a native of Asia, but it's a matter of time, especially with climate change. That's the big worry, is climate change just going to make all this so much more possible. And then I forgot to mention that golden oyster fungus has recently been declared an invasive species in various states in North America. It's one of these fungi that you get in growing kits, you know, where you get fungus growing kits. You can buy them on Amazon for 10 quid or 20 quid, and it's taking over woodlands in North America, and the fungi it's squeezing out, a lot of them are mycorrhizal fungi, so their trees are dependent on them. It's so that is unbelievably damaging to ecosystems. Just so you relax a bit, you probably need a drink.